I never imagined I could be locked out of my own home. When I bought my house in Maplewood Heights, I thought I was securing my future. A quiet neighborhood, well-maintained streets, and a homeowners association that promised to keep the community in top shape. At first, everything seemed perfect. The HOA sent out newsletters about community barbecues and seasonal lawn care tips, and I genuinely believed they had our best interests at heart. That belief wouldn't last. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a letter. It was a violation notice, claiming that my fence was not the approved shade of brown. I had painted it the exact color recommended when I moved in, but the letter stated the board had updated the color requirements. I was given 2 weeks to repaint it, or face a $500 fine. Annoyed but not wanting to start trouble, I complied. I spent an entire weekend repainting the fence, spending hundreds of dollars in the process. I thought that was the end of it. But soon, another violation arrived. This time, it was about the potted plants on my front porch. According to the HOA, they weren't in compliance with the approved greenery list. I had never even heard of such a list. When I asked for a copy, the HOA ignored me. When I asked my neighbors, they shrugged and said they had never received one either. That's when I realized something wasn't right. The violations kept coming. My lawn wasn't green enough, even though I watered it daily. My trash cans were left out too long, even though I brought them in the same day as collection. Each new fine came with a threat. If the balance wasn't paid, late fees would be applied. And then the real warning came. Failure to comply could result in legal action. I decided to fight back. I started attending HOA meetings, hoping to speak directly to the board. Every time I tried to bring up my concerns, they shut me down, saying my complaints would be reviewed. Nothing ever changed. Then, one evening, I arrived home from work to find something shocking. A bright red notice taped to my front door. It read, "Notice of Non-Compliance. Temporary revocation of residency privileges." My stomach dropped. I turned the key in my lock, and nothing. My house had been locked. I called the HOA office in a panic. A monotone voice on the other end informed me that, due to unpaid violations, my residency privileges had been revoked under a little-known HOA rule. My access to the property was temporarily suspended until compliance was restored. I was locked out of my own home. I stood on my front porch feeling a mix of rage and disbelief. This couldn't be legal. Could it? I tried to call the police, but when they arrived, they sided with the HOA. "This is a civil matter," they told me. "You'll need to go through legal channels to resolve it." Legal channels? That could take weeks, months. Meanwhile, I had nowhere to go. My entire life was inside that house, and the HOA had taken it from me. That night, I slept in my car. And as I stared at my locked front door, one thought burned in my mind. I'm getting my home back. I spent the next morning researching everything I could about HOA laws. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew something felt wrong about being locked out of my own home. After hours of reading through legal documents, I found something interesting. While an HOA could fine a homeowner, they couldn't legally evict them or restrict access to their property without a court order. What they had done to me was not just unethical, it was illegal. I called the HOA office again, demanding an explanation. This time, the woman on the other end sounded slightly nervous. "Sir, you have outstanding violations that need to be addressed before your access can be restored." "That's not how this works," I snapped back. "You don't have the authority to remove me from my own home. Either you let me back in or I'll be taking legal action." Silence. Then she said, "You're welcome to file an appeal with the HOA board at the next scheduled meeting." And then she hung up. An appeal? They were treating this like I had violated some rental agreement instead of illegally locking me out of my own house. I wasn't waiting for a meeting. I needed results now. I decided to go to the local news. I reached out to a small investigative journalism team, explaining my situation and sending them every document I had. To my surprise, they responded almost immediately. Apparently, HOA abuse stories were becoming increasingly common, and they were eager to cover it. The next day, a reporter and cameraman met me outside my locked house. I told my story while standing on my own front lawn, the red eviction notice still taped to the door. Within hours of the interview airing, everything exploded. Social media picked up the story. Comments flooded in, some from people who had experienced similar issues, others from legal experts calling the HOA's actions unlawful. The pressure was building. That same evening, the HOA president, a man named Richard Leland, called me directly for the first time. His tone was smooth but firm. "We saw the news piece. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps we can settle this matter amicably." "Sure," I said, barely keeping my anger in check. "You can start by giving me access to my home." "We'll have to review that request," he said carefully. "If you're willing to settle your outstanding balance, we can work something out." He still thought he had leverage. He still thought I would pay them for the privilege of entering my own home. "I don't owe you anything," I replied. "You're the ones who broke the law, and I have a news crew and a legal team who are very interested in what's happening here." Silence. Then his tone shifted. "You have a nice home. It would be a shame if this escalated to a foreclosure situation." I felt my blood go cold. That was a threat. A warning that if I kept pushing, they'd come after me in an even bigger way. That's when I realized I wasn't just dealing with an overzealous HOA. I was dealing with something much worse. They weren't just abusing their power. They were running a business using fines and legal loopholes to drive homeowners out and take control of their properties. I wasn't just fighting to get back into my home. I was fighting to keep it. The moment Richard Leland hinted at foreclosure, I knew this was bigger than just me. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules. They were systematically targeting homeowners, issuing absurd fines, piling on penalties, and then using those debts to take over properties. I had heard whispers from neighbors about strange foreclosures, but I never imagined I'd be next in line. That night, I met with a local attorney who had taken an interest in my case after seeing the news coverage. His name was David Morales, a no-nonsense lawyer who had handled HOA disputes before. He wasted no time getting to the point. "They've violated state property laws by denying you access to your home," he said. "That alone is enough to get a judge involved. But the foreclosure threat? That's fraud. If they've done this to you, chances are they've done it to others." With David's help, I began digging deeper. Public records showed that in the past 5 years, the HOA had foreclosed on 12 homes in our neighborhood. 12 families had been forced out, their homes resold at a profit, often to people with direct connections to the HOA board. Some of those former homeowners had since disappeared, moved away, or gone silent. I tracked down one of them, an elderly man named Tom, who had lost his home 3 years ago over what the HOA claimed were unpaid fines. When I called him, he sounded hesitant, even scared. "I can't talk about it," he muttered. "They made sure of that." "What do you mean?" I pressed. "Did they threaten you?" There was a long pause, then a whisper. "They ruined me, took my house, drained my savings with legal fees. I had no choice but to leave. You don't understand, son. These people don't play fair." And then he hung up. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just an overreaching HOA. This was organized theft. The next morning, I filed an emergency lawsuit against the HOA, demanding immediate reinstatement of my property rights and an injunction to prevent them from taking further action. At the same time, David contacted the state's housing authority, alerting them to the pattern of wrongful foreclosures in our community. We weren't just fighting for my house anymore. We were exposing an entire operation. The pressure mounted fast. More news outlets picked up the story. City officials, now feeling the weight of public scrutiny, announced they were launching an official investigation into the HOA's financial dealings. Then the final blow came. A whistleblower from inside the HOA came forward. It was a former board member, someone who had resigned months earlier. They provided emails, internal documents, and financial records proving that the board had intentionally fined homeowners into debt, then used loopholes in the HOA bylaws to seize their homes. Worse yet, the properties were then sold at below-market prices to investors tied to the board members. The evidence was undeniable. The HOA wasn't just breaking rules. They were committing fraud on a massive scale. That evening, as I sat outside my locked house, watching news vans pull up and reporters setting up cameras, I realized the fight was no longer just about me. It was about all of us. And I was about to find out just how far the HOA was willing to go to protect their scheme. The pressure on the HOA had reached its breaking point. With the lawsuit underway, a state investigation launched, and media outlets exposing their fraudulent activities, the board members were scrambling. They had spent years ruling through fear and secrecy, but now their actions were under a microscope. 2 days after the whistleblower's documents went public, I received a call from my lawyer, David. "They want to settle," he said. "They're offering to drop all fines and give you immediate access to your home if you withdraw your lawsuit." I clenched my jaw. "And what about the other homeowners they've scammed?" "They're hoping you'll take the deal and walk away quietly," David replied, "but I have a feeling you're not going to do that." He was right. I wasn't fighting just for myself anymore. I was fighting for every homeowner they had forced out, for every person they had intimidated into submission. I refused the settlement. The next morning, I woke up to another escalation. The HOA had sent out a mass email to the entire neighborhood, calling me a disruptive homeowner and accusing me of damaging the integrity of the community. They painted me as a troublemaker, someone who was threatening property values with false accusations. It didn't work. If anything, it only made people angrier. More neighbors started coming forward, sharing their own horror stories. Maria, the single mother who had been fined for her kids' chalk drawings, revealed that she had been threatened with eviction after missing a single payment on her HOA dues. Greg, the retired veteran, showed evidence that his fines had tripled without explanation. Jason, the neighbor who had first stood by me, discovered that his home had been listed in an internal HOA foreclosure planning document, even though he had never missed a payment. The board had planned to take his home before he had even done anything wrong. That was it. The final straw. At the next emergency HOA meeting, one that was now packed with furious homeowners, news crews, and state investigators, the truth came out. Under pressure, the whistleblower exposed everything. How board members had rewritten rules in secret, how they had systematically issued fines to push people into debt, and how they had illegally seized homes to sell them to investors connected to the HOA leadership. City officials wasted no time. The entire board was removed effective immediately. Several members were arrested for fraud, embezzlement, and illegal property seizures. The HOA's finances were frozen, and an external audit was launched to determine how much money had been stolen from homeowners. As for me, I walked up to my front door that evening, turned the key, and stepped inside. The locks had been changed back. My home was mine again. But this wasn't just a personal victory. It was a victory for everyone in the neighborhood. The illegal fines were erased. Former homeowners who had lost their houses were contacted, and legal efforts were made to compensate them. A new HOA was established, one that actually served the community instead of exploiting it. Standing in my living room that night, looking around at the place I'd almost lost, I realized that this fight had never been just about me. It had been about standing up to corruption, about showing people that no one has the right to take away your home through greed and intimidation. This neighborhood was supposed to be a community. And finally, after everything we had been through, it was won again. No HOA should have the power to steal your home. And thanks to our fight, this one never would again.